Hi all! This week we continue our look at conflict on the larger social context and try to apply what we've learned so far to more complicated public issues. In this module we tackle two big ideas, intractable conflict and wicked problems. Both of these concepts get at the complexity, history, and social implications of difficult, long-standing public conflicts. They also give us some insights into why these conflicts persist and how we might be able to move the needle a bit to shift the conversations toward mutually acceptable solutions or actions. So, in this brief video, I'll explain both these ideas and give a couple of examples, and then we'll talk a little bit about what actions are taken toward resolving or kind of addressing these conflicts. Okay, so the first idea is intractable conflict. So an intractable conflict is one that is so severe and deep and long-standing that it seems impossible to resolve. Super fun. No, very challenging, really super hard actually. Intractable conflicts are long-standing and seem resistant to conflict management efforts, and they often can lead to or involve violence. So the organization Beyond Intractability defines intractable conflicts as a process, first and foremost, not just a single violent episode, a process of competitive relationships that extend over a period of time and involves hostile perceptions and occasional military actions. They go on to say, the term itself acts as an integral concept, connoting processes where states become enmeshed in a web of negative interactions and hostile orientations. This pattern is repeated, indeed worsened every so often, with the parties unable to curb or manage the escalation of their relationships. So really serious stuff, right? So of course there's some variation in how this looks in different situations, but the main characteristics of intractable conflicts are an irreconcilable difference in deeply held values or identities, polarized relationships, hostility, and violence. Often there's high stakes issues of like distribution, who owns the land, the resources, who should have the opportunity, etc. A long duration and kind of a history of grievances that both parties involved remember in certain ways and frame in certain ways. And as noted in the definition, they're very resistant to resolution. So the history often involves kind of failed peacemaking efforts or peacemaking efforts that work for a while and eventually fall apart. So most of the clearest examples of this kind of an intractable conflict are these political conflicts, such as the one between like Israel and Palestine. And there's examples of these all over the world, but Israel and Palestine is one that has lasted for many, many years and has received a lot of attention from conflict scholars. So these political situations are incredibly important and challenging, and they're conflicts that have global implications, right? They're also a bit out of reach for most of us here in this class, right? We're mostly not looking at these kind of large political conflicts. But we could see examples of intractable conflict in more local contexts. So for example, one context in the US that has faced these sort of intractable conflicts has to do with environmental issues, right? Such as conflicts over land use or drilling or water rights or the storage of nuclear waste or conservation efforts and climate change mitigation efforts and so on. So these are conflicts over material resources like land, right? Who owns the land, who can use the land, to what ends. But they also involve these strong differences in deeply rooted cultural values and long-standing conflicts between groups of people. So a number of communication scholars, even some of the folks who we've read for this class, have researched the ways that these multi-party conflicts occur, the way that conflict framing happens, and then the mediation and negotiation efforts involved in trying to address such conflicts. So when we think about, well, these seem so big, right? How can intractable conflicts even be addressed if we know that what they're like? They seem impossible, right? Yet, I think it's really important to understand that people make progress on these conflicts every day. Like there's always intractable conflicts going on in our world, and there are people working to try to make things better. So folks who are involved in addressing intractable conflicts obviously understand that it's a long-term process, right? So if you're working as a mediator in something like this, it's not like you do one process, you come to an agreement and expect things to be resolved, right? Someone who's a third party mediator working with groups in an intractable conflict has to understand they're in it for the long haul. This can be years and years of work, and the gains can be small, and things can kind of seem like you win some and you lose some, like things are good and then they get bad again, right? That it might be peaceful for a period of time, but it's fragile. So in addition to addressing the material concerns, what it's really important in these situations to build relationships and try to get mutual understanding about the conflict frames in use so that reframing can happen. For a lot of intractable conflicts, they've been going on so long that the people who are involved now, they kind of inherited the problem, right? They were born into a divided society with years of conflict, and they live with it, even though they didn't start it, and it's not even clear who started or what the start was, or even if that would make a difference now, right? They just kind of live in it. So relationship building is a really important process, and a lot of the peace building work in this area will involve intentional programs, not to address the logistics of the conflict, but to help people on both sides, often like young people, on both sides of the issue, build connections and friendship. So these relationship building is one piece of the conflict management process. And it can be separate from the negotiation about material issues like ceasefires and land rights and so on, but it's crucially important, and we have some readings around that a little bit this week. So dealing with intractable conflicts means using mediation and negotiation process on the one hand, and also working with things like reconciliation and forgiveness on the other hand. So you can see how the things we've done so far sort of fit in helping people make sense of intractable conflicts. Okay, so that's really big and a little overwhelming. So I want to talk about a related idea that's not quite the same, but is also connected and that we're going to be working with this week as well. So wicked problems is a related idea that can help us think through conflicts in public settings. So this was a term coined in the 1970s by design theorists Riddle and Weber to describe the complex problems faced by sort of public planning and social policy. They contrast what they call wicked problems with what they call tame problems, not like good, it's tame, wicked meaning complicated and difficult, not necessarily meaning like immoral, right? So wicked in this sense is about complexity. Tame problems, they say, are problems that have kind of clear definitions and can be solved by applying the right type of expertise. So tame problems can still be complex, like building a bridge is a complex process. You need expertise, but it's not the same as a wicked problem, right? So the idea of wicked problem has been taken up by people in public affairs and social innovation who've offered some pretty good definitions. So one comes from John Kolko, who's a social innovator and public affairs person, and he says, quote, "A wicked problem is a social or cultural problem that's difficult or impossible to solve for as many as 4 reasons. Incomplete and contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, a large economic burden, and the interconnectedness of this problem with other problems. Poverty is linked to education, nutrition with poverty, the economy with nutrition, and so on. So these problems are typically offloaded to policymakers or written off as being too cumbersome to handle in mass, yet these are problems, poverty, sustainability, equality, health, wellness, that plague our cities and our world and that touch each and every one of us." So I read that quote kind of in its full kind of length because I think it offers a good description of what we're talking about when we deal with wicked problems. So its idea is a little different from intractable conflict, but it still gets at the complexity of social conflict in communities. And it can help us understand why issues that we might think have a straightforward or easy answer actually persist and are extremely difficult to resolve. So figuring out what to do in response to COVID pandemic in 2020 is a clear example of a wicked problem, right? We're in the middle of that right now and have been for some time. And there are many, many facets, and anything we do seems to not be complete, right? There's more things happening all the time that make this problem really complicated. Also, many of what we might think of as kind of polarized political issues, such as abortion, guns, controversies related to race and gender identity, and so on, are based on deeply held values, and they can appear in communities as wicked problems. right? So for example, if a community is trying to decide whether to build new school buildings, something that might appear on the surface to be a straightforward and maybe tame problem, the conversations around that planning can involve questions about environmental impact, the location of the schools and how that relates to socioeconomic and racial disparities, the construction of new facilities that might have implications for LGBTQ kids, and so on, the property value of homes in the area, busing and walkability, quality of life for families, what kinds of classes are together for the teachers, and so on, right? So these issues are all interrelated. And addressing the conflicts that inevitably arise in planning means that ethical conflict management and decision-making processes need to be responsive to a wide range of people, values, and concerns. So addressing wicked problems is obviously challenging, right? And part of what makes it challenging is the problem, what we understand as the problem or the nature of the conflict, is kind of shifting. It's a moving target, right? And that's not anybody's fault. That's just the nature of the problem. Again, think about COVID, right? It'd be easy to be like, oh, so-and-so is to blame for this. But the fact that things keep changing and shifting makes it a very difficult problem to address. So for wicked problems, it's hard to have a definitive description of exactly what the problem is. It's not clear when the problem is solved. Any wicked problem can also be understood as a symptom of some other problem, and any singular solution has the potential to make things worse, right? So you can see in our readings for this week and in others, addressing wicked problems requires involving a wide range of people in the process, and that looks a lot like the kind of long-term mediation processes that we might use for intractable conflicts. To me, that's how I see these things connected. Wicked problems and intractable conflicts, different ideas, but they both get at these underlying complexities that make our everyday lives challenging and require a flexible, complex, fluid approach to conflict management. So for the last 2 weeks of our course, we're going to look at what scholars and practitioners call public deliberation and public dialogue. And these are communication-based approaches to help groups and communities deal with wicked problems and intractable conflicts. Now, I know this kind of stuff is messy and can be headache-inducing, so I apologize about any potential headaches that you might get thinking through these problems. I know I get them as well. But hopefully the ideas this week give you some things to think about, and we can see some examples in the next couple of weeks of our course that show how people are using conflict management processes to help groups work through these kinds of intractable conflicts and wicked problems. All right, that's it for now. I think that's plenty to think about. I look forward to seeing your writing this week, and let me know if you have questions.